In 2009, when archaeologists were excavating a prehistoric lake bed in Motala, Sweden, they stumbled upon one of the most unusual archaeological discoveries the nation had seen. Known as the Tomb of the Sunken Skulls, the site contained a collection of skulls dating back 8,000 years, some of which had been mounted on stakes. At least 11 different human skulls were found at the site, which included the remnants of adult men and women as well as children and infants. Two of the skulls, one fully intact and the other broken in half, were pierced with wooden stakes, while several others showed signs of trauma from weapons. Almost all of the adult skulls were jawless, and one of the female skulls actually contained broken skull bones from another woman. Many bones were also found intermixed with tools and ancient animal bones, which have led researchers to wonder if some kind of ritual sacrifice or deeper religious meaning was involved with the skulls. Another suggestion is that the skulls belonged to enemies killed in combat and that they were brought back by warriors as war trophies. This theory is disputed, however, because in 2018, researchers announced that there were healing injuries on nearly all of the skulls and most of the men and women had recovered from their wounds at the time of their death. While this doesn't rule out the idea that these were enemies, it seems more likely they were members of the community who fought battles and survived. Despite all the facts, it is still a mystery who the skulls belonged to and why they were arranged in such a strange manner. Also referred to as the Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible is a massive medieval book written in the 13th century by a monk who was said to have made a deal with the devil in order to finish it. According to legend, the monk had been sentenced to death as a punishment for breaking his vows. He promised the monastery that if they let him live, he would write a book that would contain all earthly knowledge in a single day. To fulfill this promise, the monk sold his soul to Lucifer. The real basis for this legend is likely the fact that even though the manuscript is extremely long, it appears to have been written by just one person over a relatively short period of time. Created using more than 160 animal skins and requiring 2 people to even lift it, the book contains the complete Latin translation of the Bible, as well as multiple other texts, including works by Hippocrates and Cosmos of Prague, not to mention medical formulas, texts on exorcisms, and a large depiction of the devil himself. 12 pages of the original manuscript are missing, and what they might have contained remains a mystery. Some rumors say those pages contain secret satanic texts, perhaps even a method for conjuring the devil himself. In 1838, while working in Iraq, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig found a number of clay jars, each containing an iron rod encased in a copper cylinder. Koenig then published a paper in which he theorized the objects were ancient batteries. Given the age of the objects, which dated to the Parthian era or about 200 BCE, that would be an amazing technological development. But an alternate theory suggests the containers were used for storing scrolls, which would have wrapped around the iron rod and been contained in the copper cylinder. This theory has its roots in the Seleucia vessels, similar objects from a nearby ancient city. Despite the opposition to Koenig's theory, when some college students built replicas of the device, it produced voltage. So if they were batteries, they worked. Theories as to what such a battery would have been used for range from medicinal practices to printing money, creating metal plating, and making jewelry. By the age of 32, Alexander the Great had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to northwestern India, all while remaining undefeated in all of his battles. Then in 323 BC, he suddenly died and his empire fell like a house of cards. Historical documents suggest that after Alexander died in Babylon, one of his generals brought his body back to Egypt 2 years later, and that his body was held in the city of Memphis while a tomb was built for him in Alexandria. However, no one knows exactly where that iconic tomb is located. Some have suggested that it has sunk beneath the waves because it was built in the palace's district that is now submerged. If that's the case, it may have been destroyed now by millennia of both human and natural forces. Even if it were to be found eventually, there would likely be few identifying marks proving the tomb belonged to Alexander. The historians who described the building of the tomb left little in the way of physical description, so researchers would need an intact inscription to find it. To the northwest of the Nazca Lines, carved into a hillside overlooking Peru's Pisco Bay, lies the Paracas Candelabra, a massive geoglyph that stretches some 600 feet from top to bottom. The pottery found at the site has been dated to around 200 BC. No one knows the age of the candelabra itself. Its reason for existence remains equally fuzzy. One theory holds that it served as a navigational tool for sailors, whereas another claims it depicts the creator god's trident. Since the 18th century, hundreds of incredibly well-preserved human bodies have been discovered in the pit bogs of northern Europe. These bodies have been forensically dated to as far back as 8000 BCE. The famous Talund man discovered in 1950 by two Danish farmers in Denmark lived in the pre-Roman Iron Age of the 3rd century BCE. He was so well preserved that the contents of his stomach were used to establish when he lived. Despite the different demographic makeup of these bodies in terms of age, sex, and social standing, there is one mysterious and unexplained commonality in their composition. They seem to have been deliberately executed and placed in the bogs, with no explanation as to why this method of disposal would be utilized. Researchers speculate that perhaps they were sacrifices or social outcasts. The Holy Grail, the cup that Jesus drank from at his Last Supper with his disciples before his crucifixion, has never been found and almost certainly never will be. In fact, it wasn't until the Middle Ages that there was much interest in it, after those writing some of the King Arthur stories described the search for the Holy Grail as a quest that King Arthur and his knights took on. Even so, it is one of the most well-known symbols in Christianity and has become one of the religion's greatest sources of myth and mystery. Yet despite the Grail's fame, there are no serious scholarly attempts to find the Holy Grail, although it continues to be popular in fiction, being used as a plot device in many films and novels.